Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I will be reading an excerpt from God in the Gallery, A Christian Embrace of Modern Art by Daniel A. Siedell. Dr. Daniel A. Siedell has been published in numerous journals and is the former curator of Sheldon Memorial Art Gallery at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. At the time of publishing God in the Gallery, he was an assistant professor of modern and contemporary art history, theory, and criticism at University of Nebraska-Omaha. So, without further ado, here is Art Since 1945, Precursors, from God in the Gallery, A Christian Embrace of Modern Art by Daniel A. Siedell. Enjoy. Before a discussion of contemporary artistic practice can take place, it is important to discuss very briefly the development of American art after 1945. For it is this period, the 1940s and 1950s, and the following decades that set the stage for the present context. The most influential artists of this period are Jackson Pollock and Marcel Duchamp. They produced work that was so unusual and unexpected, and that undermined traditional notions of what constitutes art, that they were accused of destroying art. Critic Robert Storr, former curator of contemporary art at the Museum of Modern Art, observed, quote, "Jackson Pollock's work is a reef on which theories crack," end quote. Through their reconceptualization of objects, practices, and environments, the work Pollock and Duchamp created served as both a powerful stimulation and a challenge for aesthetic innovation for subsequent generations of artists. Jackson Pollock was the first star artist in the United States. He was featured in a Life magazine story in 1949 titled, quote, "Is he the greatest living painter in the United States?" There were two reasons for his star status. First, he was a ruggedly handsome, Wyoming-born, California-reared American who liked fast cars and denim jeans. His tragic death in an auto accident in 1956 at the age of 44 only intensified this James Dean-like persona. Second, he was at that time producing paintings that seemed to destroy every preconception of what painting was believed to be. Pollock had already enjoyed early critical success when he and his wife, artist Lee Krasner, moved to the Springs of the Hamptons in 1947, where he took over an old barn for his studio. By 1946, critic Clement Greenberg was already calling Pollock one of the most important painters working. It was there that he enacted his complete break from conventional painting, which rendered even the most radical paintings in the early modernist tradition, Casimir Malevic's white paintings and black squares or Picasso's cubist canvases, conventional by comparison. In his cramped barn, Pollock rolled out unstretched and uncut canvas on the floor. With sticks and the back ends of brushes, he began to drip skeins of enamel paint onto the surface, covering every square inch of canvas with a tangled web of strands and drips of paint. Pollock produced these remarkable canvases called poured or drip or all-over paintings from 1947 to 50. These works were unusual for two reasons. First, and most obviously, was the means by which they were produced. By pouring and dripping paint while walking about the canvas laid on the floor, not applying paint slowly and deliberately on a stretched canvas propped on an easel. Second was that the paintings had no subject matter, and so it was, and is, nearly impossible to interpret them, to ascertain whether they have any meaning at all. Critic Donald B. Cuspit suggests that the power of Pollock's all-over pictures is that they, quote, "embrace generality. They have concretized totality by overcoming traditional pictorial dichotomies." The traditional pictorial dichotomies to which Cuspit refers consist first and foremost of the tension between form and content, between the how and the what of the painting. Another pictorial dichotomy is the relationship between a painting's surface as consisting of the illusion of a foreground and background, and its identity as simply a flat surface on which pigment is applied. It is these dichotomies, these tensions, that create the vibration of painting as high art. Florensky himself declares, quote, "True art is a unity of content and the means of expressing that content." It is this unity or dichotomy that Pollock's paintings appear to transcend or destroy. Such classic dripped or poured paintings as one number 31, 1950, do not provide the viewer with a conventional way of experiencing them. That is, they seem not to include content or a subject, but instead to be all content or all subject. In addition, the surfaces of these paintings refuse to allow the viewer to read a foreground and a background, further complicating and frustrating the habit inherited from the Renaissance of viewing a painting as offering the illusion of a perspective on an object that is depicted. This makes it difficult for the viewer to both enter into and exit from the painting. That is, these paintings do not seem to invite the viewer into the picture at a specific point, lead the viewer through the composition, and lead him or her out. Instead, the viewer is presented with a totality that defies such nuanced optical movement on the viewer's part. The experience is strangely akin to theologian R.R. Reno's provocative description of Origen's writings as being like standing under a waterfall. One seems to take it in, as much as one can, in one gulp. This is not to say that the surface is unnuanced, undifferentiated, and chaotic. Rather, these pictures offer a vertiginous variety of foreground and background shifts and changes, so much so that relationships such as dichotomies seem to dissolve. Perhaps this is what an early critic, Emilie Jeanneret, experienced and was trying to suggest when she wrote that Pollock's paintings were a, quote, mop of tangled hair I have an irresistible urge to comb out, end quote. These remarkable paintings transcend the dichotomy between form and content. They can be read as either all form or all content. They affirm in shocking ways the materiality of painting and its identity as a physical artifact. According to Kirk Varnedoe, who curated the important retrospective of Pollock's work at the Museum of Modern Art in 1998-99, quote, Pollock reinforced this material quality by stepping on the canvas where it lay on the floor, by stubbing out his cigarettes on it, by pushing his hand against the surface of it. He affirmed that the painting was an option in the world, an extension of the physicality of the world, not a window onto anything else, end quote. Pollock's dripped paintings forcefully reasserted the status of paintings as an object, first and foremost, which influenced artists such as Donald Judd, Robert Morris, and Carl Andre, all of whom would become associated with minimalism, a movement that sought to draw aesthetic attention to the work of art as an object in the world. Pollock's canvases also drew unprecedented attention to the process of their making. Pollock's drip paintings affirmed painting's identity as a process. In his famous essay, The American Action Painters, 1952, critic Harold Rosenberg wrote, quote, At a certain moment, the canvas began to appear to one American painter after another as an arena in which to act, rather than as a space in which to reproduce, redesign, analyze, or express an object, actual or imagined. What was to go on the canvas was not a picture, but an event. Rosenberg's highly influential essay sought to articulate a broad interpretive framework that included such painters as Franz Kline, William de Kooning, and Hans Hofmann in addition to Pollock. Rosenberg's concept of action painting was an attempt to deal critically with the process as a primary part of painting's meaning. Rosenberg's concept was strengthened by the film stills published in 1950 by photographer Hans Namuth of Pollock's painting in his Long Island studio. Namuth recorded Pollock's athletic movements and graceful gestures as he spilled, slapped, and dripped paint onto his canvases, drawing even more attention to the physically and materiality of the paintings as well as offering empirical proof of Pollock's working method. These photographs, Rosenberg's essay, and the paintings themselves had a powerful influence on performance artists such as Alan Caprow and George Massianias, who found the weight of Pollock's aesthetic meaning in his performance of them. This offered a foundation and legitimization of their own work, which was even less object-based and more ephemeral. Pollock's work, then, could simultaneously affirm that painting is an object in the world and the record of a performance of a priest who could, by his gestures and actions, enact transformation in an almost sacramental manner. Pollock's barn thus became the sacred space within which the priest Pollock worked and the context within which his actions had meaning. The paintings were the byproduct, the residue, the aftermath of certain sacred actions at a particular moment in time in a particular context. It is no wonder that Pollock was often loath to allow his paintings to leave the barn, since they were the product of an intricate set of practices in a particular space. At a certain level, Pollock clearly understood that the space, the paintings, and his actions were all of a piece. In addition to, or perhaps because of, the impact of Pollock's work, Marcel Duchamp experienced a revival in the mid-1950s. His revival was part of an attempt on the part of critics to find a historical precedent for the object-based work seasoned with ironic humor of such artists as Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Jones, who were learning the lessons of Pollock and the other action painters and interpreting them through their own distinctive aesthetic preoccupations. After his scandal at the Armory Show in 1913 and the infamous urinal episode in 1917, Duchamp receded from public view, quitting art to concentrate on playing chess for the French national team and splitting time between New York and Buenos Aires. But this was to change in the early 50s. Art historian Hal Foster even suggests that Duchamp only became Duchampien in the late 50s and early 60s. The rediscovery of Duchamp's ready-mades in the late 50s and early 60s helped facilitate the exploration of the aesthetic potential of all objects and the object status of all workers of art, and helped derive the minimalist aesthetic. Duchamp became Duchampien through his practice of presenting as art ordinary objects such as shovels, urinals, bicycle wheels on stools, combs, and other ordinary found objects that he called ready-mades. It is therefore worth rehearsing the original context of Duchamp's most famous ready-made, Fountain, 1917. There is probably no object that expresses more perfectly the various responses to modernist art than the urinal Marcel Duchamp submitted to the jury of the Society of Independent Artists in New York in 1917. For Christians and cultural conservatives, this work, which Duchamp humorously entitled Fountain, confirms all suspicions that modern art is a joke that had been pawned off on an innocent and unsuspecting public. Duchamp scholar William Campfield assesses the situation quite accurately when he observes that, quote, "Some deny that Fountain is art but believe it is significant for the history of art and aesthetics. Others accept it grudgingly as art but deny that it is significant. To complete the circle, some insist that Fountain is neither art nor an object of historical consequence, while a few assert that it is both art and significant, though for utterly incompatible reasons. Duchamp had been living in New York City since the Armory Show and was instrumental in developing the Society of Independent Artists, which sought to provide an open, free venue for the expansion of modern art and the education of the public. Duchamp's Fountain was intended to test those principles. Under the pseudonym R. Mutt, Duchamp submitted a urinal for presentation in the Society's open exhibition. It was denied acceptance, and in response, Duchamp, defending the artistic freedom of R. Mutt, resigned his position on the board. In further defense of Mutt, Duchamp published, anonymously, a critical apologetic of Fountain in The Blind Man, a periodical established as an educational outreach of the Society. The apologetic claims that, quote, "he took an ordinary article of life, placed it so that its useful significance disappeared under the new title and point of view, created a new thought for an object." The significance of the Fountain episode is important on several levels. Duchamp's ready-mades affirm that art is not merely an object, it is an institutionalized way of making, looking, experiencing, and interpreting. It is a confluence of specific circumstances that include the artist, viewer, object, and the way that object is presented and displayed. As Florensky's remarks suggest, this is as true for Reblev's Holy Trinity as it is for Duchamp's Fountain. Duchamp considered Fountain and his other ready-mades to be more than a detached, analytical exploration of art's philosophical basis. Duchamp believed them to be works of art, and therefore they were not only deeply aesthetic, but also saturated with carnal and spiritual desire that was mediated through and embodied by the complexity of the aesthetic. Quote, "Art cannot be understood through the intellect, but is felt through an emotion presenting some analogy with a religious faith or a sexual attraction. An aesthetic echo. The important point here is to differentiate taste from aesthetic echo." End quote. Despite the fact that Duchamp did not make Fountain, but found it, it still possesses an aesthetic echo, which is a complex harmony of sounds derived both from the object itself and its circumstances of presentation. Duchamp's objects are not dead, static, or neutral. They are alive, imbued with belief and desire, in large part because they were first part of Duchamp's lived environment before becoming a ready-made work of art. The object's previous life outside the world of art, whether a urinal, bicycle wheel, shovel, or comb, remains in some way to inform the experience of the work. This belief and desire come to the fore in the role that the photographer Alfred Stieglitz's photograph of Fountain came to play in 20th century art. First, it documented an object that was lost almost immediately after its rejection from the exhibition. Second, the aesthetic beauty of Stieglitz's image brought out the aesthetic aspect of the object, which even invited commentary that likened the work to the forms of the Buddha and, perhaps more surprisingly, the Madonna and Child group. Duchamp was not primarily or simply a joker, but was fascinated with the complexity of his and our attachment to objects, and this fascination underwrote his interest in Hermeticism, Gnosticism, alchemy, the erotic, and spirituality. His creative work is an aesthetic and creative reflection on the nature of knowledge and spirituality, which is overlooked by most commentators. More recently, however, attention has also been paid to Duchamp's abiding but often overlooked interest in Buddhist thought and practice. Pollock and Duchamp shared an interest in the erotic aspect of art. The sensuality and materiality of Pollock's dripped paintings were often likened to sexual activity. The erotic and its embodiment in objects, environments, and practices characterizes an important direction in contemporary art that reveals the contours of a world saturated with desire. This offers productive space for critical exploration and elaboration from Nicene Christianity. This kind of exploration and elaboration is particularly evident in the metaphysical and mystical speculations of the Russian philosopher-theologians Sergei Bulgakov, Pavel Florensky, and Vladimir Solovyov. Art criticism can benefit from such an aggressively creative approach to contemporary art. What is required is a renewed sensitivity to a world saturated with sacramental and liturgical meaning and significance that can emerge most fully through an analogical view. The pre-modern approach mediates the immanent and the transcendent because God is viewed as the cause of all things. All things are symbols and signs of other things, all of which have their being in and through God, which connects them. The pre-modern approach is reflected in St. Augustine's famous prayer in Confessions. Quote, "You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." End quote. Desire plays an important role in the analogical worldview, for it is desire that leads one toward the other and ultimately toward God. And it is this movement toward the other that is the ground of transcendence, a transcendence of one's own limitations, one's own lack. Graham Ward argues, quote, "I desire not because I lack the other, but because the other is closer to me than I am to myself, and makes me aware that what I lack is, in part, myself." End quote. The analogical worldview affirms that all desire, even erotic desire, manifests an ultimate desire for communion with God. to partake in the energies of his divine nature. This desire for transcendence is at the same time a process for self-exploration. For St. Augustine's question, who is God, is inextricable from the question of who St. Augustine is. Thanks for watching, everyone. So, what do you think? Personally, I have never attempted to perceive modern art from or as a Christian. Reading this brought up the question of what art truly is. Should any form of object be considered art just because an artist sees the object that way? Also, from a Christian perspective, people describe beautiful women as works of art. But who is the artist? Most Christians would say the artist is God, but many would also say that nude, especially erotic art depicting beautiful women, is sinful to even look at. But the question arises, isn't that kind of art depicting humans in a more Edenic state than, say, medieval biblical illuminations? I really enjoyed the short biography, if you will, of both the artists, Pollock and Duchamp. I appreciated on many levels Duchamp kind of trolling his colleagues in the Society of Independent Artists by anonymously entering his urinal for their consideration and then resigning from the board once they rejected his art. I definitely encourage you to grab this book. The demographic is Christian, but as per usual, I will suggest this to even those who aren't Christian. It was thought-provoking, informative, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. That's it for today, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed this little reading. If you did enjoy, maybe like and subscribe if you're feeling frisky. I don't know why I say that. Anyway, remember, I love you. God loves you. Bye-bye.